£2.6 million. In 1963, that was enough to buy 1,000 houses. It took 15 men, exactly 15 minutes, to steal it. They carried no guns. They fired no shots. They stopped a 60-ton Royal Mail train dead in its tracks, using nothing but a leather glove and a 6-volt battery. And when it was over, they vanished into the English countryside with 120 sacks of cash, the largest robbery Britain had ever seen. Most of that money has never been found. By the end of this story, you'll know exactly how they pulled it off, why one 30-second mistake handed the police their entire gang, and what happened to the fortune that disappeared. Because the Great Train Robbery wasn't undone by brilliant detective work. It was undone by a game of Monopoly. The man behind the plan was Bruce Reynolds, career burglar, armed robber, and, by the summer of 1963, a man with the most audacious idea in British criminal history. Reynolds had learned, through a shadowy insider known only as the Ulsterman, that the Royal Mail's travelling post office ran a nightly service from Glasgow to London. The second carriage, designated the high-value package coach, carried registered mail. Most nights that meant about £300,000 in used banknotes. But after a Scottish bank holiday weekend, when the banks had been closed for days, the haul swelled to something extraordinary. Reynolds knew the next bank holiday fell on the first weekend of August. He began recruiting. Think about what that took. Reynolds didn't just need men willing to rob a train. He needed men capable of stopping one. He assembled 15 career criminals from across South London, men from different gangs who had never worked together. Gordon Goody, Buster Edwards, Charlie Wilson, Roy James, a racing driver with nerves of cold steel, Roger Caudry, and a small-time crook named Ronnie Biggs, whose job was to bring along a retired train driver who could handle the locomotive. Reynolds also brought in the South Coast Raiders, an experienced robbery gang from London, because he'd never hit a train before. Remember the retired driver Biggs recruited? In about 10 minutes, that man's failure changes everything. The target was the 3 a.m. stretch between Leighton Buzzard and London, where the line passed through dark, empty Buckinghamshire countryside. Reynolds chose 2 locations. The first was Sears Crossing, a remote signal gantry where the train could be stopped. The second was Brydago Bridge, half a mile further down the track, where the embankment dropped to road level and Land Rovers could wait unseen. The plan was simple. Stop the train at the signal, take control, drive it forward to the bridge, and unload. On the night of August the 7th, 1963, Reynolds and his crew took up positions along the track. What happened next unfolded with a precision that stunned investigators for years. At the signal gantry, one of the gang climbed up and covered the green light with a leather glove. Then he wired a handheld lamp to a cluster of 6-volt batteries and switched on a red signal. It was crude, it was brilliant, and to any driver approaching at speed in the dark, it was indistinguishable from the real thing. At 3 a.m., the Glasgow mail train rounded the bend. Driver Jack Mills, 58 years old, a quiet man from Crewe who'd driven trains most of his life, saw the red light and did exactly what any driver would do. He stopped. His co-driver, David Whitby, climbed down from the cab to use the trackside telephone and report the unexpected signal. The phone line had been cut. As Whitby turned back toward the locomotive, a hand grabbed him from behind. A voice said, "If you shout, I will kill you." He was thrown down the embankment. In the cab, Mills had seconds. Masked men came through both doors. He fought. He swung at the first man through the door, and then something struck him from behind. A metal bar swung hard against the back of his skull. Mills went down. He was bleeding heavily. He was semi-conscious, but he was alive. No guns had been used. No shots had been fired. The train belonged to the gang. Now came the part that Reynolds had rehearsed. The gang uncoupled the rear 10 carriages, isolating the engine and the first 2 cars, the one carrying the high-value packages. The plan was for Biggs's retired driver to move the shortened train forward to Brido Bridge. The man climbed into the cab, looked at the controls, and froze. This was a massive English electric Type 4 diesel locomotive. The trains he'd driven were small suburban units. He had no idea how to operate it. And this is where the story pivots. They needed Jack Mills, the man they'd just beaten unconscious. Biggs roused him. With blood running down his face and the cold metal of fear in his chest, Mills was forced at gunpoint to drive his own train to the spot where its cargo would be stolen. Half a mile, the longest half mile of his life. At Brido Bridge, Mills brought the locomotive to a stop for the second time that night. What followed took exactly 15 minutes. The gang formed a human chain down the embankment. 120 mailbags, 2.5 tons of used banknotes were passed hand to hand and loaded into a waiting Austin Lodestar truck and 2 Land Rovers. They left 8 bags behind. They took everything else. £2.6 million gone. Before they left, one of the gang gave the post office staff inside the carriage a final instruction: stay where you are for 30 minutes before calling the police. It sounded like a smart play, buy time for the getaway. But it was the single most damaging sentence anyone in the gang would ever speak. Because when police heard that instruction, they did one calculation. 30 minutes. A vehicle moving at normal speed in the dark over country roads. That gave them a radius. The hideout was within 30 miles. They were right. The gang drove to Leatherslade Farm, a remote property in Buckinghamshire that had been rented under a false name. For the next few days, they divided the money. They celebrated. And in one of the most reckless acts in the history of British crime, they played Monopoly, using real banknotes from the robbery. They handled cups, plates, bottles, furniture. They left their fingerprints on everything. Reynolds had hired someone to burn the farm to the ground after they left. The man never did it. Meanwhile, a local farm worker named John Maris had noticed something odd about the new tenants. They'd paid £100 over the asking price. Every window had been blacked out. Maris called the police. Reynolds had hired someone to burn the farm to the ground after they left. The man never did it. Meanwhile, a local farm worker named John Maris had noticed something odd about the new tenants. They'd paid £100 over the asking price. Every window had been blacked out. Maris called the police. Over 70 officers worked the case. They collected more than 2,000 reports and over 2,500 witness statements. Within weeks, arrests began. Roger Caudry was the first, caught in Bournemouth with over £140,000 in his rented garage. Then Charlie Wilson, then the rest, one by one. The trial opened in Aylesbury in January 1964. It lasted 51 days, 613 exhibits, 240 witnesses. When it ended, 7 men, including Reynolds, Goody, Wilson, and Biggs, received 30-year sentences. It was the harshest punishment handed down for robbery in British legal history. The judge, Mr. Justice Edmund Davies, wanted to send a message. And what about the Ulsterman, the inside man who made it all possible? His identity was never officially established. He was never charged. He was never caught. Decades later, Gordon Goody claimed to reveal the man's name in a documentary, but by then the Ulsterman was already dead. What about the money? Of the £2.6 million stolen that night, police recovered roughly 10%, less than 400,000. The rest simply vanished. And here's the final twist that makes this story sting. In 1971, Britain decimalised its currency. The old pound notes and £5 notes that made up the bulk of the haul ceased to be legal tender. Whatever the robbers hadn't spent by then became worthless paper. They stole a fortune. And time stole it back. Jack Mills, the driver who stopped for a red light that wasn't real, who fought back and was beaten for it, who was forced to drive his own train to its plundering, never recovered. He suffered constant headaches for the rest of his life. He returned to light duties but retired early in 1967. He died in 1970, aged 65. His family always said the robbery shortened his life. In 2014, a locomotive at Crewe Station was named Driver Jack Mills in his memory. The man the robbers needed most became the man the story forgot. And then there was Ronnie Biggs. Biggs had played a minor role. His one job, bringing the retired driver, had failed spectacularly, but Biggs would become the most famous of them all. In July 1965, having served just 15 months of his 30-year sentence, Biggs scaled the wall of Wandsworth Prison using a homemade rope ladder, dropped onto a waiting removal van, and disappeared. He fled to Paris, spent £40,000 of his £147,000 share on plastic surgery, moved to Australia. When Scotland Yard tracked him there, he escaped again, this time to Brazil, where he fathered a son and became immune from extradition. He lived in Rio for decades, became a tabloid celebrity, even recorded a song with the Sex Pistols. He didn't return to Britain until 2001, voluntarily, broken by ill health. He was sent back to prison. Released on compassionate grounds in 2009, he died in December 2013, the same year as Bruce Reynolds, the mastermind who had planned it all. 15 men, 1 glove over a green light, 2.5 tons of cash passed down an embankment in the dark, and a Monopoly board that held more fingerprints than any crime scene in British history. The Great Train Robbery was undone not by the robbery itself, which was by any measure flawless, but by what came after, by the arrogance of men who believed their biggest problem was dividing the money. It wasn't. Their biggest problem was a game they played while the money was still warm. Most of the 2.6 million was never found. Where it went, who buried it, who spent it, who lost it to currency reform, remains one of the great unanswered questions of British crime. If that missing fortune and the people who chased it interest you, that story goes deeper than one video can cover. If stories like this deserve to be remembered, the ones where a single glove changed history, then this channel is where they live. Subscribe, because there are more of them coming.